All right. Hey, everyone. We're going to begin now. So, I hope y'all are here for Battlecode. If not, you are now here for Battlecode. Welcome, and thanks for coming out. It's great to see everyone, and it's great that y'all came out on such a cold night to kick off Battlecode. So, this is Battlecode. So I guess like a random introductions. My name is Kelvin. I'm one of the devs this year. Over here is Nate and Ivy, who will also be, will basically be, us three will be like the main people talking up here during lectures and like helping you guys out during lectures through all this stuff. All of the devs mysteriously vanished in the last 1 minute, but they'll be sitting over there and also answering questions. The general like setup for these lectures is that for the first hour or so, we'll go through some basic tutorials. This time, we're going to be introducing the game spec along with that. And then for the rest of the time, it'll basically just be like one-on-one sessions with the devs trying to figure out like installation issues, trying to get bugs to fix, hopefully, and like other sort of things that you would want to talk to. That would basically be office hours. That's like what most of the time is here for. A little bit of administrivia before we begin. There will be a meal provided sometime between 7 and 8 every day for the first 2 weeks. And lectures, although they are not mandatory, will be very helpful for like building out all these things. So we'll give you tutorials on movement, communication, all sorts of good stuff that'll help your AI move. And the end goal for those who are taking this for credit, this is a 6-unit programming fundamentals class for course 6. The way you get your credit is that you beat an example player that we build at the very end of the time, at the very end of the class. And like generally this is like something that we like sort of like show up here anyways, so like it'll be like pretty clear, it'll be like a pretty fair game if you're following along and like programming. All right, great. With that, we'll just jump straight into the specs because that's what we're really here for. Like we really want to see what this year's game is about. So continuing off of last year, we have Battlecode Crusade now. So if you remember last year, we were on planet Earth, and then there was a gigantic flood, and now we are on Mars. And so now that we're starting to colonize Mars, there have been 2 factions that have risen up. And basically, the only way you can sort of like have peace is just like, the only resolution here is just total war. So that's what we're going to do this year. So at Battlecode every year, if you know, changes the format. So your code last year won't really work for this year, and really a lot of the game specs and a lot of the game dynamics also change. So even if you have like code that sort of works for last year, it's better that you change it up for this year because it probably will not do so well. So the game format, Battlecode Crusade is a turn-based game where the robots on a tiled grid are each controlled by individual computer programs. So last year what happened was that you had one controller that moved all of the units, and that was really great. This year, the turn-based format means that every unit will each take a turn in order, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So last year we had a giant slew of units that you could build. This year we have a few as well. Robots include castles, churches, pilgrims, crusaders, prophets, and preachers. The objective of the game is to destroy the enemy team castles. If by 1,000 rounds, both blue and red castles remain, the winner is determined by the team with more castles, then followed by a unit value that we calculate based on how many units you still have living at the end of the round, and then by a coin flip if it so happens you are so evenly matched. Great. Also, feel free to ask any questions and raise your hands at this time. The main communication channels for Battlecode for us this year, we have a Discord channel that we linked in an email. You can also email tedevs at mit.edu. You can also email battlecode at mit.edu. But if you want like real-time like feedback, it's generally better to get on the Discord. We'll also have people following on the Twitch stream. Is this readable, by the way? This is not readable, right? Okay, we'll get a little bit closer. Yeah, thanks. Okay, great. Yeah, that looks good. Great. So if you want to follow, if you're not able to come to these lectures for any reason, if you're out of MIT campus, or it's too cold, or you don't feel like it, you can always watch the Twitch chat. And we'll be answering Twitch questions as they come along, and if we feel that they're really important, we'll also share it to the rest of y'all. But basically, feel free to ask questions at any time and raise your hands. And yeah, we'll try to answer them in a timely manner. Great. So going along, map and resources overview. So game maps are procedurally generated and are square 2D grids ranging from 32 by 32 to 64 by 64 tiles. Every map is either horizontally or vertically symmetric, and this just means that your starting positions are generally even for both teams. Like, you won't be sad because the red team starts off with like a gigantic like fuel load right next to them, and the blue team starts off with absolutely nothing. Generally, whether you start with the red or blue team shouldn't matter to your strategy. Each tile is either passable or impassable rocky terrain, and each team starts off with 1 to 3 castles on the map, 100 carbonate, and 500 fuel. And we'll talk more about what carbonate and fuel will be doing later on. So passable tiles can have research points on them when mined by pilgrims, provide either carbonate, which is used to construct rockets, or fuel, which is used to run them. And we'll go into a step-by-step of basically more detailed overview of how much fuel and carbonate it takes to build all of your things a little bit later on. So, but basically, anytime you really want to do anything in Crusade, you really have to use fuel, and if you want to build anything, you probably have to use carbonate as well. So rather than being distributed evenly, carbonate and fuel deposits are usually found in small discrete clumps on the map. I think if I toggle onto here, you can see that these are these deposits over here, and they're generally really clumped. If I go out a little bit more, you can see that this is horizontally symmetric. So whether you start as the blue or the red team, your strategies will generally be the same. Great. And robots have knowledge of the full map at the beginning of the game and can only see robots within their vision radius. So, units overview. So last year, if you remember, oh yes, do you have a question?
Oh, will the carbonite always be in some sense clumps?
Well, they will generally be in clumps, but I think that we will generally also have a few maps that test the limits of our game spec. So I would say generally expect them to be, but don't they're not guaranteed to be. If that's the best answer. Great. Any other questions? Great. All right, so let's move on to the unit overview. So like I said, unlike last year's Battlecode game, each unit was last year's Battlecode game. We had one gigantic process that controlled all the units, and that was great for you really you get the full view of what all your units are doing, and really that meant perfect communication between everyone. This year we have every unit being controlled by its own process. Each unit is initialized with a 100 millisecond chess clock and receives 20 milliseconds of additional computation each round. And same old, when a unit is spawned, it's spawned with a unique 32-bit integer ID and occupies a single tile. If it loses all of its health, it just dies. So if you remember from last year, we also changed the spec from having only Java to supporting Python, Java, and C. And that was last year, and that meant instead of having these instrumenters that counted how much stuff that you were doing every turn with your functions, we just gave you a chess clock and said do whatever you want with your time. And this is the same thing that's happening this year. Only every unit will have its own chess timer, which means that each unit will be computing its own processes individually. So there are two types of units: robots and structures. Robots are mobile units that fight, move adjacent to squares, build factories, carry resources, etc. They'll be your main workforce through most of this time. And then there are two types of structures: castles and churches. So castles are the immovable versions of churches that cannot be created, and they carry a lot of special abilities. And churches are sort of like your factories this time. They produce robots, and they're basically a storage place for your pilgrims to deposit their resources into your global economy. So a little bit more overview into the castles. Every team starts with 1 to 3 castles on a map, each with initial health 100 and vision radius 10. So these are really important because if you lose them, you die. So try to protect your castles at all time. Castles have all the abilities of churches, but cannot be built and have greater health. And castles have unique communication abilities. Not only can all units send messages to castles for free, but castles can also trade carbonate and fuel with the opposing team castles. So now this year we can actually trade using castles, and also some communication will cost fuel, but not communication to castles. We'll go over this a little bit more. And so each turn, a castle can offer a barter to a castle of the opposing team, and barters are offers to trade X carbonite for Y fuel, or vice versa. And so you can use this functionality to actually cooperate with the other team if you feel that you're low on something and they're low on something, and you could actually benefit from trading. When all the team's castles are destroyed, a team is considered defeated. Yes?
Is this like either one team wins or the other team wins, right? Like there's no control.
Yeah. So the barter, you're benefiting each other, but there's still only one winner, if that helps.
Like the only metric that matters is who wins.
Yeah. Okay, great. So churches. Churches are structures with the ability to produce robots and carbonite for their carbonite and fuel costs. Basically, these are your factories. They'll go around. You'll build them wherever you want, and they're useful for, one, creating all your units that you really want to, and two, they'll be useful for storing your fuel and carbonite after you mine them. And so churches can be constructed by pilgrims for 50 carbonite and 200 fuel, and have initial starting health of 50 and a vision radius of 10. Great. And so now on to the robots. So these at the beginning are just like your headquarters and your factories. Now we're actually getting to the things that'll run and shoot and fight for you. So always the exciting stuff. So there are 4 classes of robots: pilgrims, crusaders, prophets, and preachers. Over here, pilgrims are sort of like your engineer worker units that go around, build stuff, mine stuff, and crusaders, prophets, and preachers are sort of your fighter units that go around and try to gun down the enemy units. So pilgrims are scouting, mining, and building robots, while the other ones are only capable of combat and resource transportation. Here's a basic summary of the robot types with a little bit more description. The important things to note here is that pilgrims cannot attack and have a pretty low vision radius and starting health. So if they're not protected, they probably go down pretty fast. But at the same time, they're able to build churches, and they're also able to carry carbonite and fuel and actually mine them from fuel deposits, which these 3 cannot do. A little bit more about these. Comparing the Crusader, Prophet, and Preacher, we have the Crusader, which is a very low carbonite cost, and among them they have the fastest unit speed of all 3 of these, and movement full cost per radius squared. If you're familiar from previous years, we calculate everything in radius squared so that it's a little bit more convenient for y'all to calculate how much fuel you're using. So each movement fuel costs 1. So if I'm moving 2 squares down and 2 squares to the right, that's going to be a total of 8 fuel cost. And starting health among these, it has a pretty medium starting health and a pretty decent vision. And over here, and also a pretty decent attack. The Prophet over here it has a little bit more cost, but the key thing here to note is that it can have a wider attack range. Basically, you can attack from farther. It also over here has a minimum attack range, which means if you get close enough to the Prophet, it cannot attack you back. And over here we have a Preacher. Key things to note is that it has a lower...
Can you scroll down a little bit so they can see the whole table?
Oh, yes. Okay.
Wait, no, just down a little. Because the Twitch is blocked in the bottom right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
great.
good.
Okay, thanks. All right, so yeah. So we have the Preacher over here, has the highest construction carbonite, and over things to note, it has the widest starting health, it has the smallest vision radius, but it has attack damage of 20 HP for 9 squares. Basically, if you are to attack a square, it actually deals 20 HP damage to that square and all the surrounding squares. It also does a lot more damage. So a trade-off for being able, it's more costly to move, and it's more costly to make, and it's a lot slower, but you get a lot more damage out of it. Yeah, so an overview over here. Crusaders are capable of shorter range combat, Prophets for longer range, and Preachers deal AoE damage. And depending on what sort of strategies you're going for, you'll probably make some mixture of all 3, but definitely make Pilgrims. Great. So robots can move to or attack any square in their speed or attack radius, even if that terrain is technically unreachable. In each turn, A unit can only perform one physical action, either moving, attacking, depositing, mining, trading, or building. So you can't just move and attack at the same time. Great. And so this part is new for this year. So we have a reclaim mechanic going on this year. When units are destroyed, they leave half of their carbonite required to build them, in addition to any carbonite they might be carrying. Oh, yes.
For the AoE damage, does that also affect your own units?
Does that affect our own units? Yes, it does. So yeah, try not to attack your own units. Any other questions? Yes.
Does it affect the unit who sent the attack?
Does it affect the unit it's attack?
I think so, yes.
Yes.
We will give clarifications on the Discord.
Any other questions? Yes.
Is there unit collision? Can you move through another unit friendly or otherwise?
You can teleport through them, but you can't end the turn on the same square as another unit.
Okay, and that holds for both friendly and
Yeah, it does.
You should repeat that for Twitch.
Okay. Yeah. For everyone on Twitch, if you I guess like I can just repeat all the things that have been said. AoE damage will attack all your own units as well, including your own unit if it happens to be in the blast radius. And for unit movement, you cannot end your turn on another unit, friendly or enemy, but you can move through it if it is within your movement radius. Great. Any questions from Twitch?
No, from the top.
Okay.
Pick someone at the top.
Oh, someone at the top. Yes.
the castles and communication?
A castle, yeah, we'll be going over communication actually like right afterwards. But basically every unit can send communication for some cost. It's only that sending communication to a castle is free. All right, any other questions? All right, great. So moving on to reclaim. So if a unit is destroyed, it will drop any resources. It was half of the resources made to make it, and also any resources it might be carrying. So if a pilgrim was destroyed and carrying 10 fuel and 3 carbonite, the attacker will now have an additional 10 fuel and 8 carbonite if it so decides. Yeah. And so this really means over here that like one, protect your pilgrims in case the enemy decides to raid them, because that's just free. That's free resources for them. And also, if you happen to be attacking, you should probably be a little bit more strategic about it, because if you go in blindly and your team is demolished, not only do you have fewer units, you also basically gave the enemy team a richer pool of resources to attack you with. Great. And the last part over here, or the next part over here, which is a little bit different from previous years, is communication. Yes?
Can resources, are they automatically picked up by the enemy, or do you need to go pick them up?
Are they?
You need to pick them up.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, so the question is, do you have to pick up the resource? Do they drop onto the ground, or do you immediately pick them up? The answer is they will be dropped on the ground and they will be picked up, and we will update the docs to say that. Yes?
But if your unit already is at capacity, why haven't you rolled over your unit?
If the unit is already at capacity?
Yeah, like only.
Oh, okay. So I think the docs will probably reflect this later, but like when you're picking up like fuel and stuff, you'll probably like pick up as much as it can to a limit, and then leave the rest on the ground, basically. Great. Any other questions? Yes. Which side attacks first? So Battlecode is a turn-based game, so basically like whoever is attacking on that turn, if it like kill, so basically you'll be taking turns like hitting each other. And even though it is a turn-based, yeah, it is a turn-based game, even though generally like games play out to be sort of like real-time strategy-ish games. Yes?
So to clarify, after you get deployed there, when you drop onto that square, you have to move on to the square in order to get those resources?
Probably, yes. We'll we'll clarify this in a little bit. Sorry, I think all of the devs just left. Yeah.
Is it similar to Civ in the sense that there's during your turn you can each thing once, and then it's someone else's turn?
Oh. Yeah, I think we'll get into that in terms of the turn queue. But yeah, basically the idea here is that like each of your units will be running
I
a.
can explain the turn queue if you want.
Oh, okay, sure.
Yeah. So last year, the way that it worked was like everyone on the blue team on Earth would get a turn, and then everyone on the blue team on or red team on Earth would get a turn, and then everyone blue team Mars, everyone red team Mars, and it would go like that. This year, there's a single turn is all of the units, and there's a turn queue, which is so the queue starts out as each team's castles in alternating order. So, for example, it'd be like if there were two castles, red castle 1 would go, and then blue castle 1, and then red castle 2, and then blue castle 2. And then after that, every time a unit's produced, it's added to the queue. So like units produced earlier will like get to move like first in a turn. But like the two teams' turns happen effectively simultaneously, starting with the castles, I guess.
Yeah.
Red moves first. Like if red and blue take exactly the same step before red moves first, does that mean that red gets to attack first on the
Yeah, if red happens to enter the encounter first, but like
suppose that all of red and all of blue stole each other on like a particular turn. That if red moves first, then does red have an advantage?
so if red moves first, does red have an advantage? I
I
would.
think so. I think it's a very slight advantage. So
Yeah, it's a very slight advantage.
Like if you manage to destroy an enemy with one hit like that unit, and then you will still with one last contact if it's stable.
So if a unit is attacked and it dies, it will not be able to make a counterattack. I guess like the other part is like if you you cannot move and attack at the same time. So if you move, the enemy team will probably see you first and then attack, and they'll have the like attacking advantage if that's what you're asking about.
So to clarify the concern is that so red team builds their first unit first, and then blue team builds their unit. So red team's unit is going to get to go first because it just so happens that red got to build their unit first. So like then couldn't the red unit just destroy the blue unit without the blue unit getting a chance to do anything? The answer is technically yes, but effectively no, because you can't attack every turn anyways. So like attacks aren't like it's not going to be so cut and dry as like red just gets to attack first every turn. And also the number of units will be like in the hundreds. So it's going to matter much less sort of like individual units like going before each other, because between two armies, like there'll be a roughly even distribution of like units going before each other and stuff like that. So there's a slight advantage, but like we don't think it actually is going to matter.
There's like questions from Twitch about how we save messages, like communications.
How we save communication messages. Can you? We haven't talked too much about communication.
Should we just do that?
Yeah, I think we'll just like talk about communication a little bit. So communication. Actually, are there any questions before that? Great. So communication. Each unit on the board has its own process and is sandboxed from other units. To facilitate communication in global planning, each unit has two possible methods of communication. Radio is the primary method of communication usable by units. In any given turn, you can broadcast a 16-bit unit to all units within a squared radius x squared, consuming x squared fuel. So, for example, a unit with ID 1984 that wanted to broadcast a message with a square radius of 10 squares would need to expend 10 fuel. On the next round, all units within that radius will see that a unit with ID 1984 broadcasted the given message. And units can radio broadcast simultaneously with all other actions. So this is, note that robots can see the unit ID that produced a broadcast, but not which team it belongs to. And this also means that when you are broadcasting, you will broadcast to the enemy team as well. The other type of communication is that you have a direct channel to communicate with an 8-bit value to all their team's castles for free from any distance. That also can be combined with any other action, just like the general radio communications. So at one time, you can like basically broadcast around you, but you can also broadcast back to the castle, and they can figure out what to do with that. To answer the question of someone was asking about saving messages, you can definitely save previous messages and store them, but they'll be sandboxed inside every unit. So like if you're saving messages in like your like castle number 1, castle number 2 will not be able to see that because it's not a message. Yes. Yes. Yes, right. Okay, great. Yeah. For Twitch, the question was, can castles broadcast? And the answer is yes, they totally can. Great. And we already talked a little bit about the turn queue. It consists of 1,000 rounds, and every round is a turn for every unit on the board. And basically, as units are created, they'll be added to the end of the turn queue. And so basically, units that are created later will move after units that were created first in like the overall game. Great. That actually summarizes the entire spec. And so even though we have like all these really nice numbers, they will probably not like stay that way for all the time as we figure out like more things about which bots are cool to use and which ones aren't. We'll be tweaking these numbers slightly throughout the game, and especially after the sprint tournament. Great. All right. So now that we've... Oh, yes, question?
Does unit move on the same turn that it's created?
Can a unit move on the same turn that it's created? No.
Twitch wants to know, can you broadcast and move and shoot on the same turn? I believe the answer is yes.
Yes, you can broadcast and do other things on the same turn. But among these things, moving, attacking, depositing, mining, trading, building, these, you can only do one of these per turn, and only once. Great. Any other questions? Oh, yes.
Is vision shared?
Is vision shared? The answer is no. So every unit can only see what can only see inside their vision radius, and if you try to, and we'll go into the API a little bit afterwards. Basically, if you try to like look up any like bot that's not in your vision, you'll basically get no information. Yes. Can castles attack? No. Churches and castles both cannot attack. They can only produce. They produce other things and communicate. And castles can also trade. Yes. What happens if if something hits their time limit? Okay, yeah. So if you happen to hit your time limit, or if you happen to throw any uncatched exception inside your code, that bot immediately gets destroyed. Yeah. Great. Any other questions?
Yeah, we have one from Twitch.
Uh-huh.
What is the limit on castles broadcasting stuff out?
What is the limit on castles? There is no limit. Okay. The limit is...
We'll specify it, and we'll specify it on the Discord.
Yeah, the limit is to be specified. Although you probably do not want to send too many of these messages because they will be costing fuel for you. And you'll be using fuel for almost everything. Any other questions? Great. Oh, yes.
This course says that it's being compiled to JavaScript. Is this true?
Yes. Yes. So we'll be going into the API a little, like basically like right after this like Q&A session. But yes, this year we decided to change the stack a little bit so that no one has to download Docker, I think. Okay, great. Yeah. So yeah, let's go into basically the API, and we'll get started with building the Java. We're basically building an example player. For everyone in the audience, like at MIT, feel free to bring your computers to lectures because most of the time this is a great time to communicate with your team members in person, and also generally like we'll be coding some part up here so you can follow along and try to code as well. So last year we had Docker and that went well. This year now we have basically what's happening is that all of your code will be transpiled to JavaScript, and we'll be running that JavaScript. We'll be running that JavaScript. So even though that JavaScript is like the main language that we'll be compiling all of your code to, we also have a Python and Java API, and if you ask nicely, maybe we'll have other APIs for you guys. But yeah, I guess like we can start from there. Josh, is the npm package? Oh, I mean, like, does it exist? Okay, great. So,
Wait, question for the devs before they leave.
yeah.
Does that mean that Python and Java will have equivalent performance in terms of time?
We will be, basically this is also to be determined. Basically we know that like, even though we're compiling, there's all of them to the same language, there's still like, things that differ between the three languages. And so I think this 100 millisecond is specifically for JavaScript and also to be tweaked if we find out it's too low or too high. And we'll probably give out different ones for Python and Java as we instrument and figure out how long each bot takes. Great. And also, if you guys aren't not familiar with chess timers, basically you have a starting amount and you'll be incremented that every turn. So basically, you can take that and mean that like you can like allocate that like 20 milliseconds for every turn, or you can just wait for a lot of turns and like on one turn maybe have like 5 seconds of computation for one unit. And both of them are valid things to do with your time. Great. So we'll be beginning here. So JavaScript this year is Battlecode this year is running through JavaScript. So what's going to happen is sometime after this lecture, we'll release both this documentation onto our website, but also we'll be releasing a node package for this. So for everyone, basically that means I'll be installing npm together. So if you happen to be on a Mac, this process is really easy. What you'll be doing is basically installing Brew. You'll be installing Homebrew, and from there installing Node and npm from Brew. So Brew install Node, and we'll just exit out that, and also Brew install npm. For people using Linux and Windows, these can also be downloaded straight from the Node site. And I would show you with my VM, but it's actually kind of slow right now. But the setup for all three of these should be relatively straightforward. And we're also here afterwards to, yeah, basically. That's all VM does. But we'll be here afterwards in case there are any installation issues, both today and tomorrow, if they actually released it today. We'll see. But we'll start off with looking at the API a little bit and also just like writing our example player. If you're familiar with example players from previous years, we generally start off with just moving in random directions, and that's like a fine thing to do. And they'll have like a great happy time. We'll start with Python because that's just a great language to start off with if you're new to coding. So over here, basically, what you want to do is you want to create a directory, any directory, and create a file called robot.py. And what's going to happen is that you're going to have, really what you want to do is import from Battlecode, import the BC abstract robot and also the specs. And so what the transpiler is going to look for is basically a class myRobot that extends the BC abstract robot. And if you don't have that, it'll be really sad and won't run your code. So over here, this is the baseline for what your robot needs is a turn function. So this is basically what it'll run when your turn actually comes. So let's break down this code a little bit. So we have this like step that just like counts the number of turns this robot has been alive, and by the way, all of your units will be sharing the same class. So over here, we'll note that like we'll have like a part that says if it's a crusader and if it's a castle. Basically, like you'll have to like figure out what you're doing, what each of these are doing. Some of these, if you try to do something naughty, like try to attack with a castle or try to move with a church, it'll be some combination of either failing very silently shouting an error message, or just outright killing the bot. So try not to do those things. Thank you. So what we're going to do every turn, we're going to increment a step. We're going to log what turn we're on using self.log. And let's start with the castle first, because that's what everyone starts off with. So for the first, for a castle, if self.step is less than 10, basically for the first 10 rounds of the game, we're going to build a crusader. And over here, this is just a logging message saying that we're actually building this crusader. And then we're going to return self.build unit, specs crusader 1, 1. And this is just saying we're going to build a crusader at the location southeast of us. The map, it's a little bit more, we put this more in detail in the map spec, but the top left corner will be 0, 0 for our maps. So that's basically all we're going to do for right now.
All right, should we release everything then, so people can start trying to install stuff?
Yeah. If we can find the other devs, we'll definitely do that.
Okay.
Arvid, do you know where they are? Okay, there goes The Last of Us. Hopefully by the end of this tutorial we'll have everything released, but if not, feel free to stick around, have some pizza, and we'll probably have it like very shortly afterwards. Great.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes. Is coding directly in JS an advantage? So it'll be, to put it most succinctly, it'll probably be your most error-free way of coding. I think there are like a few things that we tell you not to do in the specs directly, but basically if you want, all three of them should be fine languages to code in. It's just that like with JS, we'll be putting fewer like warning labels in our documentation about what you should and shouldn't be doing. I think the biggest one over here is that you definitely don't want to call print in Python, or it just really won't do anything, which is why we provide self.log so that you can log all of your things in JavaScript.
Another question, which Python packages can I use?
Which Python packages can I use? So basically, I think the answer is like we're starting off with basically none, and I think basically none besides the like standard packages, and as time goes on, we'll be adding more as people need. Like probably NumPy, and other ones as people want them.
But like you already have random and stuff like that.
Yeah, we already have random.
Yeah.
And you have math. So there are a lot of things you can already do. The specs are
Twitch wants to know what computers like the bots will be run on, in competition and stuff.
Okay.
To get an idea for timing.
To get an idea for timing. We'll answer that question as soon as the other devs arrive. Sorry about that.
Maybe after that.
Yeah, maybe after that. Yeah, but I think we'll be going into the API a little bit afterwards. Basically, like if you're worried that like your computer can't handle like the like chess timer, you can always like extend the amount of time that like you run your files locally so that you can sort of like see what your bots would do if they didn't die from timing out. Great. So over here we have specs.castle. Over here, and the castle doesn't move, but we'll be building basically a crusader at 1, 1 every turn. And what the crusader will be doing over here is that it's going to log its own health just to make sure that it's not slowly dying. And then it's going to basically choose a random direction to move in. So the choices over here are 0, -1, north, basically all the cardinal directions, north, east, southwest, northeast, etc. And then we're going to basically choose a random one of those and log which direction we're trying to move in, and then actually move in that direction. So important thing to note here is that you definitely want your turn to eventually end. If you happen to include like any really long loop, that's probably going to kill your robot. Yes. Okay, great. So here is basically a sneak peek of what the API will look like once it's ready. It's online. Okay, great.
You can do npm install BC19.
Okay, great. So we're going to do that. So if everyone would love to follow along on their computers, basically, once you install Node, the next thing to do is install npm install BC19. Great. And it runs. It's fast. And so once you've installed BC19, is it just BC? Okay. So BC19 comes with really two functions. There's BC19 run, which if you just use that, it'll give you a really nice manual. So the important things here are the basically what BC19 run is. It's going to basically run a game right there. So what you want to specify is the red directory of where you're putting your red, where you're putting the robot that you want to be like the red team, and the blue directory of where the myRobot class is for the blue robot. And if you, we'll talk a little bit more about the other ones. This is a map making seed, and there are, and over here, these are really important. If you happen to be running into time issues, you can manually set the time of how much you want to give each robot. So over here, the initial time and the time every robot gets at the end of turn. So we'll just try this out. So over here, we were writing this in a directory called example, because it's a Python example. So we'll be going into cdbots, and we'll also be releasing these like example players later on. And basically, we're going to run BC19. Is this visible for everyone? Or actually, I'll just enlarge it a little bit more. There we go. Great. BC19 run. The blue directory is going to be example, and the red directory is also going to be example. And we're just going to run basically these two robots against each other. Oh, yes, okay. And we're also going to give it a little bit of extra time, because my computer is being a little bit weird. So, great. And it looks like, yeah, we're having a really fun game. I'm sure everyone is following along and like keeping good track of everything that's happening. All right, great. And it looks like blue at the very end timed out, and so red wins by castle annihilation. Great. And so I know everyone loves these lovely like log files, and like you can just like follow along and read all of it. But in case you needed like a little bit more of a visual thing, we actually do provide a visualizer, which will be on the Battlecode website. And so anytime you run anytime you run a Battlecode game, you're going to get a file called replay.bc19 or whatever. There's an option to like change the name of this, but basically like you'll get these like replay files, and we're providing basically a very like in detail like visualizer for your games. And so over here you can upload a game and it'll play. So over here, some things that you'll want to notice off the bat. These over here are castles. These like little things over here. Great. And then start. Oh, this is at the very end. That's why. Okay, so great. So you can sort of see those like crusaders walking around doing their own jazzy thing. I know it said like create 10 crusaders, but we ran out. If you like check the red team, like you'll notice that they have actually like 0 carbonite, so they can't actually create any more units. Over here, you can click on any of these units and get a little bit more information about it. So over here, important things, the fuel and carbonite that's shared globally, and the unit type, unit 3. 3 is for Crusader, as we'll detail in the docs. And that's pretty much it for this lecture. We've gone through the actual game specs. We've gone through building a a example player, and we've gone through actually running a game and visualizing it to see what went wrong. And so now is basically time for everyone else to try this out on themselves, and all of the devs will go around and basically help out if there are any issues with installation or if you think you found something wrong. Again, if you want to contact us, you email Battlecode at mit.edu or the devs at mit.edu, or
Discord.
yes, but preferably please use our Discord, because that's where we'll be communicating the most, and also there's a lovely community that you can join there that shares all sorts of memes. All right, great. Thanks everyone. Thanks Twitch, and that'll be it for today.
Twitch has a couple
Oh,
questions.
just kidding. We have a question and answer section. Twitch has questions. What?
Okay. So Twitch wants to know how to install things on Windows. The answer is Google npm install. Click on it'll bring you to the Node website, and you click download installer, and then you run the .msi and accept all the defaults, and then you have Node. And then you can do the npm install bc19, and it should just work.
All right.
Oh, also people want specs, but